Just kick us off also, Agre, I suppose, with a conversation. Frederick Leliman was sentenced to death.
Yes.
So what does that mean in the Kenyan context?
It is basically an exercise of the court's discretion to impose sentence in the crime of murder. And so, being that our laws, as we speak now, prescribe death as the maximum sentence in a case of murder, this is what, in the wisdom of the court, it found would be an appropriate sentence for the person whom it considered had the largest or the biggest responsibility for the deaths of Willie Kimani, Joseph Mirori, and Josephat Mwenda.
Okay.
Yes.
So what does it, does Kenya actually execute a death sentence, or is this life imprisonment?
It's basically at the discretion of the president. But as we know, the last person to be executed in this country was executed, I think, 1986, 89. That's a long time ago. Since then, we just have a lot of death row inmates in our prisons with no executions having been done. During the term of the former President Mwai Kibaki, he commuted a number of death sentences to life imprisonment. But since then, I don't think there's been much in that space. We just have a lot of death row inmates in the country.
Okay.
Yes.
Eric, did that sentence come as a surprise to you, or were you expecting it?
No, not really. I think the circumstances of the death of the Mavoko 3 warranted, in my view, a death sentence. Because if you look at, when you consider the decision by the Supreme Court in Muruatetu, and there's been a lot of litigation around the area whether the death penalty is constitutional or not, and I think the courts have decided to retain the death penalty in our books, but have given courts discretion to determine whether, in the case of murder, the circumstances of the murder warrant a death penalty. And I think the court took into account, in my view, all the relevant factors, including the sophistication in which and the planning that was put in place to ensure that this death occurs, the fact that they used state resources to track and trace these people, and it was planned well in advance to defeat the courts of justice, and the fact that each and every one of those, the three, were killed close to one another, so that as someone is being murdered, the others could see it, could feel it, and they could know that, you know what, this one has just been killed, I am next. So looking at all those factors, the court, in my view, arrived at the right decision to impose the death penalty. I may say that perhaps I feel that the sentences for the others, the second and third and I think fifth accused, in my view, may have been a little bit lenient at taking into account all those factors, because if none of those players were there, the death then, or the execution of that, which in my view would almost have been a perfect crime, and we will talk about all that, because there are certain interventions which, if had not been done at the point Willie Kimani disappeared, then the police would have gotten away with this murder. So taking into account all those things, and the fact that the chances, the really high chances of them getting away without accountability depended on the other players, I felt the court was a little bit lenient to that effect. Perhaps maybe except for the person who confessed, because it is actually now the confession.
And this was the informant Ngugi?
Yes, yes, yes. The fifth accused, I think. That confession assisted us to be able now to tie together the evidence and so therefore supported the other technological aspects of it, because there's a lot of technology that was involved in detection of this crime. So that perhaps his sentence, yes, because of the confession, that for me I would have felt like it was okay, but for the other two, I still felt the court was a little bit much more lenient, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Agri, did you work with Willie?
Yes, I did.
So how did hearing that sentence, how did the IJM fraternity receive it?
I think for us, from the point of conviction of the four, we found that to be very encouraging, considering we had been waiting for this case to conclude over a period of maybe 6.5, almost 7 years. And so as we came to the sentence, as the President has mentioned, we expected that these sentences would be, uniformly severe, because each of these participants played a role in a way that contributed to the transaction that was the killing of the Mavoko 3. And so because of the fact that they played a role, knowing that these people would likely or were going to be killed, we expected that the punishments or the sentences would be severe across the board. But that was not the case, and we respect the decision of the court in coming up with the sentences that were meted against each of the three: the second accused, the third accused, and the fifth accused. And so, for us, at the end of it, we count it as a positive step towards police reform, being as it may, and we hope that the sentences would be deterrent to other officers who are, doing policing work every day, from what the court described in terms of the contribution of each of these participants.
Okay.
Yes.
We've also been joined in studio by Hannah. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you feeling this morning?
I am very well, thank you.
All right, good to have you here.
Thank you.
It's been 6 years, almost 7 years in pursuit of justice. Having that legal process come to an end on Friday, did you feel like a weight was lifted off your shoulder? Is there closure that comes with it, or essentially, how did it feel?
Actually, it felt very good. It was like a relief. And personally, it gave me peace of mind in knowing that Willie Kimani's death was not in vain. And also, it will help me with closure. And at least, personally, I really got to know what really happened that day. That really helped a lot in the healing process. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it brought you closure, and it helps you to know
Yes.
what really happened.
Yes.
Given the details, some of which have been highlighted by Eric, and some of which have been highlighted by Agri, is there some of it you wish perhaps you didn't know?
Sometimes, for me, I think knowing the truth was really, it made me feel much more better, because I had so many questions, but no one could answer those questions. Even as much as maybe I could ask IJM for answers, they could not fully give me answers of what really happened that day. But it really helped me to find a closure in knowing how Willie died. Although it was very painful, but at least I was able to deal with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. As an advocate, Eric, I remember covering advocates marching from Milimani law courts into the CBD, demanding justice for Willie Kimani. Why did this take so long?
It's a multiplicity of issues. Of course, for us, it's something that concerns us a lot, that this trial took that long. But there are so many factors that you take into account, one of them being the huge caseload that our courts have, the fact that sometimes the defense would not always be ready, the prosecution maybe sometimes it's not always ready to proceed. There's so many clever ways of trying to delay a criminal trial such as this, because you know, the longer you delay a criminal trial, the more other factors come into play. Witnesses may, you know, because it's natural, some may die, some may forget, some may suffer fatigue. I think the advocates in these cases appeared in court for probably close to 200 appearances. Those are, you know, a full day. So when you look at all that, you see that it would only have benefited the defense if these cases had delayed. So the Willie Kimani case has really a lot of lessons for us, a lot of reflections for all of us involved in the criminal trial, to just ensure that we are able to expedite criminal processes and you know, have those cases determined within a reasonably shorter time. I mean, we all know that, like in the US, we had Floyd Mayweather. You know, the investigations were done, completed, and the trial completed before Willie Kimani could be completed. So we have you know, a bit of all those challenges, but all said and done, I think the court in this instance, and you know, like this trial, I think was handled by 2 or 3 judges because of transfers and everything. So I think the court did the best they could in the circumstances, but we need to improve the way we handle our criminal cases.
All right. And we need to take a break, but there's something Hannah said about Willie Kimani's death not being, Willie Kimani and the 2 others, their deaths not being in vain. There was a statement released by the members of the Police Reforms Working Group on the sentencing ruling issued in the Mavoko 3 case. And some of what this statement points out is that there have been some gains, right? I see here a paragraph: since June 2016, when the 3 were murdered and accused persons arrested, we have seen over 40 police officers convicted of murder and other crimes. This is a big step in the right direction. We commend our investigation, prosecution agencies, and the judiciary for safeguarding human rights and acting efficiently in the administration of justice. Just to put this in context, before that, the paragraph before reads that before the death of the 3, only 2 officers had been convicted of murder in the Kwekwe Wandaza case. But the statement also continues to point out that there's still gaps that exist that require to be addressed. And some demands of this, that the Attorney General and the Parliament effectively and fully implement the National Coroner's Service Act of 2017. And I think that's part of what you were referencing, Eric, and appoint a Coroner General to oversee its implementation. Parliament to criminalize enforced disappearances through legislation. Government of Kenya to ratify without any reservations the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. Investigation and prosecution of all cases of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings in the country. All police killings are to be swiftly and impartially investigated to ensure the use of lethal force is appropriate. The Government of Kenya to provide reparations, including monetary compensation for damages caused to victims, medical and psychological care and rehabilitation for any form of physical and mental damage, as well as legal and social rehabilitation. And lastly, the Government of Kenya set up a judicial commission of inquiry to inquire into the issues of extrajudicial executions and enforced disappearances in Kenya. And why is this Police Reforms Working Group making these demands? And they explain it here, why this conversation is still relevant today. It says that we can be encouraged that there has been a drop of 30% in cases of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances in 2022 compared to 2021. However, 1 year on, No one has been prosecuted for the cases of bodies dumped in Rivayala, reports of a slaughter container at a police station in the city where none other than the president has said a special unit of the police slaughtered Kenyans and dumped their bodies in rivers. So essentially, the Police Reforms Working Group is asking the question, what about these guys? You know, where is the justice for them and these families? All right, we take a break, as I mentioned, but we continue the conversation on the other side. With me in studio, Hannah Kimani, Eric Theuri, and Aggrey Juma. Welcome back to AM Live, and this is the topic of conversation: ending enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings. What remains to be done? We looked at some of that just before the break. A statement following the sentencing. Again, just a reminder of who we have in studio. We have Hannah Kimani, Willie Kimani's widow, Eric Theuri, President, Law Society of Kenya, and Aggrey Juma, Senior Manager, IJM Kenya. As I take my seat, perhaps, Hannah, did you feel, once that sentence was handed down, did you feel that justice was done?
To me, actually, I shed tears, but they were tears of joy, because as you know, in Kenya, actually, there was a time Justice Lesit she was promoted. So we felt like maybe she will not continue listening to this case. So therefore, we personally had mixed emotions, because we were like, now if she's been promoted, if you're given another judge, then we are going to start all over. Then that case is just going to be dead and gone. But we really thank God that they allowed her to continue handling that case, and eventually the courts, they gave us justice that we deserved, but really deserved. Because that morning he had woken up to go and earn his daily bread, and in his line of duty he was assisting someone. Then quite unfortunately someone thought they should end his life.
Yeah. Okay. Eric, how important were forensics in this case?
Extremely important. And we're not just now talking about forensic per se. We are talking about the connection between the science, the medical science, the technological science in terms of phone triangulation, being able to place the witnesses to the scenes. There was DNA evidence. Unfortunately, I think that DNA evidence was thrown out because of the manner in which it was collected. Still a lesson in terms of how crime scenes should be managed. So they were extremely critical. This Willie Kimani was among the first trials that brought into sharp focus the use of technology in detection of crime. But it wasn't a walk in the park. I remember the Law Society had to go to court to try and preserve the call records, to get Safaricom to provide those call records so that we can be able to ensure that that aspect of the investigation is not lost. There was a lot of back and forth. We almost had to make an application for contempt against the late Bob Collymore. I think then he was the CEO of Safaricom. Before they could give that data in the manner in which we felt needed to be given to be able to to assist in the investigations. So this in this trial, technology really played a big part in putting the pieces together.
Okay. Without the confession, would it have been possible to do so? Put the pieces together? Aggrey?
I think it still would have been possible. The level of investigative expertise that we saw, even in the early days of this trial, was top-notch. What the confession statement did is that it pieced together different things that the officers had already started seeing as far as this case is concerned. And I think also it also pieced together different statements that different witnesses had already started mentioning. For example, at the field where these killings took place, there was an officer, another officer, who was working at the weighbridge, who passed by while these vehicles were parked there. Testimony in court. You know, and already somebody had seen them in that space together with the neighbors, and then the confession statement now sort of corroborated this, you know. So when it is corroborated in that manner, when it is confirmed in court, from a legal perspective, then it becomes evidence that is really good for the court to make its determination. And that is just one aspect of it. The technology aspect that has been mentioned was also heavily confirmed what the confession said. So that already was something that you know, the law enforcement officers, investigators were already looking at that time. And now these other things, the confession and the other testimonies and evidence that was already being seen and being found really assisted. Couple that with the fact that our lawyers from the office and our investigators and part of our team already understood the risk that the team was facing in supporting Mwenda, and they knew the challenges that he was facing. And even in her judgment on Friday, in sentencing on Friday, the judge focused heavily on the pattern that went, the transaction from the time of the first case, the second case, and even court attendances, and the work that went into play for these officers to plan these killings. And so what I'd say is that the evidence spoke to each other in a way that allowed the court to make a determination.
Okay. Hannah, how have the last 6 years have they been? Given, yes, you're a wife and you're also a mother. You had 2 children, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
One of your son having been 6 months, was it?
In 2016,
yes,
our firstborn Castro Kimani was 4 years. Our secondborn Patterson Kimani was 9 months old.
Or 9 months old.
Yes.
Were you a stay-at-home mom?
No, that time I was doing farming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what you do to this day?
No, but
Okay.
partially.
Oh, but partially.
Yeah.
All right. So what have the last 6... Are you comfortable reflecting back on these memories? Let me start there.
It's okay.
It's okay?
It's okay.
All right. So how have the last 6 years been like for you?
The past 6 years have had its share of ups and downs, but usually the most difficult part is when the children ask questions, because like for the second born, he has no memory of the dad. But if you show him a photo, he'll tell you this is dad, but there is nothing else. Then for Castro is the one who asked, he asked a question, so what happened? Then you explain in a language, you cannot go too much into details, but you just explain in a language he can be able to comprehend. So you answer the questions as he asks. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was that day like for you? My understanding of the newspaper reports I've read is that he left for work.
Yes.
His father says he checked in on him, found out if he required medication, I think for, his bones. And then, so he left for work, and then the reports are that he wrote a note on tissue paper or something like that, passed it on with your number. Was it your number?
No,
it was the client's wife's number?
The client's wife, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
To reach out that they're in danger.
Yeah.
When did you start to get concerned?
That day was like any other normal day. So he woke up, he prepared himself. He left home at 6 a.m. So he was picked by a boda boda rider. So he dropped him off at Alliance, where he met with the taxi driver, Moirore. But he was to be home by around 2 p.m. He was supposed to be home. So 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m., he's not yet back. So, but I tried to call him. His phone was ringing, but no one was answering. So in the evening at around 7:30 is when a colleague of his, Lucy Ngare, called me and she asked me, is Willie at home? I told her no. I asked him, why are you asking why Willie is not at home? So she told me they are thinking that maybe Willie was abducted and they are looking for him. Yeah, that is what happened that day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you get a sense, what were the emotions you're experiencing at that time?
Actually, there were mixed emotions. Actually, what was even worrying me is, what am I going to tell the parents? That was my biggest worry. I was wondering, what am I going to tell them? Because now the following day in the morning on Friday, I was wondering, do I tell them or do I not tell them, or do I just let the day pass? So during the day, I called my mom and I explained to her what had happened. So she told me, just go look for them and inform them that Willie did not come home, but the organization he works for, they are looking for him.
Okay.
Yeah, literally, do we know that he had, by that day he had already even died. He had already passed on. Because to us, he died that day, 30th of June.
Okay.
Yeah.
Agre, you worked with Willie.
Yes.
What prompted the phone call? If you're privy to that information, what prompted the concern?
Yeah, the information is now public, as it was part of the testimony that was given in court. When they were abducted, just outside Mavoko Law Courts, they were taken to a container, which was an ungazetted detention facility at the AP camp. And they were held there for most of that afternoon. And it was during the time when they were in that container that Willie thought it would be wise to, send an SOS. And so what he had was his pen and a piece of tissue paper. And on that piece of tissue paper, he wrote the information that contained the number of the wife to the client, Josephat Mwenda. And basically he said, he asked whoever was going to pick this thing, this piece of tissue paper, he said, Pigia, then put a number. It was the Josephat Mwenda's wife's number, and asks the person to tell a colleague of ours that Willie, Joseph, and Josephat are in trouble. In fact, it was in Swahili, so he said wako hatarini, and he said they're at the chief's place in Syokimau. And so this tissue paper was put in these electric sockets. There was one in the container. I think he removed it, put it inside, and then started looking outside. Eventually, there was a boda person, and he threw it. This person picked it. He did not have credit. He went, found credit, and then called the number to Mwenda's wife. And when she received the call, as most of us would, maybe initially she felt maybe it was this committee people. And then this person was just persistent. Eventually, later that evening, she calls back and this information is relayed. And within minutes it gets to us. And that is now when basically the search starts. It was a week-long search. From that, it was a Thursday, the 23rd of June. And from Thursday to the following week, Thursday, because the sightings started on Wednesday, according to the testimony of the officers from Oldonyo Sabuk. But the two police stations in Oldonyo Sabuk were arguing on whose jurisdiction the bodies were. They had been spotted by Wednesday. So after 2 days, I think one of the bodies floated to one side of the jurisdiction, because I think the river divides the station jurisdiction. And that is when now they were collected and brought to city mortuary. And this week of search is what a lot of families in this country go through daily. I'm sure today, yesterday, last week, you will find there are families that were out there in City Mortuary, Kenyatta, and different other facilities trying to find their loved ones. Unfortunately for some, they've not found them to date. We've seen through our community engagement work families that have never found their loved ones. Some of them saw their kinsmen last in a police station. And when they came back, they were told he was released to nowhere. They never came back home. There is no trace of them. And so for us, the totality of the evidence in this case, and probably maybe the fact that the rains were not heavy at the time when these three friends of ours were killed, really assisted to ensure that we found their bodies. Because in the nature of the place where they were dumped after being killed, the intention was that they were not to be found. So from the Oldonyo Sabuk Bridge, not so far from it, there's the falls. I think it's 14 falls. Mm-hmm. And so when the river is swollen, it goes into the 14 falls, and then after that it's wilderness. There is a national park there. And you know what happens when bodies find their ways into national parks. For us, they barely moved 200-300 meters from the bridge, and somehow they floated to the shores. And that was, that week. So we moved by Friday. We moved from searching for missing persons into now a murder investigation. And what the president of the Law Society mentioned was really crucial. The habeas corpus case that was before Justice Kimaru really assisted to piece together a lot of the evidence that early. And a lot of it was so much for finding Willie, Joseph, and Josephat. And now after that, when we found out that they had been killed, the focus now shifted to identifying the perpetrators and bringing them to book.
Okay. Eric, you've talked about lessons that this case has taught the legal fraternity, the justice system, critical lessons. Was this a case in which police were investigating police? And I ask that because clearly from the evidence, there was collusion to detain Willie Kimani, Mwenda, and the taxi driver illegally, because their details were not entered in the OB book by the time they were placed in the container. So if there is collusion at that level, how confident were you that police-led investigations? Because IPOA, as I understand it, relies on, to process forensics, they rely on the DCI labs. So how confident were you that this case, as an advocate, given your experience in the justice system, how confident were you that it would be resolved to the conclusion we have today?
As we talk about lessons, one of the first and most important lesson that we learned from Willie Kimani is that there are few rotten apples within the police force that give it a very, very bad name. Because the investigators who handled the Willie Kimani case really did a thorough and professional job. Of course, we all know that there were a lot of challenges in that process, but they handled the job well. The DPP also assisted by, very early on in the investigations by appointing senior prosecutors to guide the investigations as that process was going on. And so the one thing you realize is that the evil always does not always win. And the lesson here for us is that we need to improve our capacity to investigate, and that is the reason why, one, you have IPOA, but two, we also need the National Coroner's Act implemented, so that you have a national coroner service that is able to investigate these cases of disappearances. We need to...
How would that be different from what is happening now? Is it the government chemist who...
Government pathologist?
It's a government pathologist, but you see, when you have the system of national coroners, where it works very well, is that where there is any unexplained death, then the person comes in and they have that mandate to conduct certain investigations around the death of that person. They are able to go to the scene, give general directions about how those crime scenes are supposed to be managed and collect the forensic evidence around that area. So it is a more independent and professional service that is intended towards ensuring that there is accountability for any unexplained or any unnatural death. The current system is such that the pathologist just looks at the body, but there are so many other factors that are determinant on the cause of death, and so understanding the scene and being able to look at the body, you tie the two together. And those are very critical, because you see, like in the case for the Mavoko 3, the scene of crime, you have to go to the scene to gather some DNA, and that DNA can then be used to tie together what you find on the body. And that is the reason why, if you have a proper service, a proper coroner service, they would be able to do that, because that is then their work, and they would be working with the investigators to ensure that that is done. So for me, I think that there was, to a certain extent, because of the heightened collaboration that was there between IJM, LHK, DPP, and the police investigators, and working together, there was a sense that the investigations were being done in a proper way. But that said and done, I think the greater lesson towards then the justice criminal system is the fact that there needs to be that collaboration. You remember the fifth accused, having then confessed, was also in danger because of the manner in which the other accused persons used to operate. And so even though they had been denied bail, he had to be held in a separate prison from this for his own security. So questions of witness then interference came into fore. There were witnesses who had to be placed in witness protection because of chances that there would be interference. We had to make a very strong attempt to resist various applications that had been made to release the accused on bail pending the hearing of the case, because of the aspect of interference, the possibility that they could interfere with the witnesses. So all that shows that we still have a lot more to do to ensure that there is proper accountability, especially when the suspects are high-ranking police officers, because you have to rely on the police to conduct those investigations. But also, these police are also friends with the people who are investigating. They understand the methods that the police will use to investigate. So they are at a place where they have the resources, they have the connections to be able to frustrate a criminal investigation, and also have access to resources to be able to interfere with witnesses. So all that just shows how difficult it is to get accountability for the so many cases of extrajudicial killing by the police and the cases of enforced disappearance. And that's the reason why you need now to have the proper legislation being put in place, because it gives the resources to be able to ensure that there is accountability on the part of the police.
Okay, and I'll give you occasion to sort of explain what legislation now then is required to ensure accountability on the part of police. I'll pull this up, but the Standard on Saturday really went big with this story, and the headline was "The Beasts." Did they say the beasts of Mavoko? Let me just check that picture. I have it on my phone. But reading these reports on what transpired, Agri, Mwenda did, in my understanding of the events, did everything right. He was shot by Frederick Leliman. He launched a complaint with IPOA. He was then connected to IJM, as I understand it. IJM, concerned after he was arrested, was it for a trumped-up traffic offense, then applied for witness protection. He did everything right, and he still ended up...
Cost him.
Yes. How does that happen?
That is the definition of impunity. When basically, the way we say in Swahili, utadu, you know, when somebody who is severely disadvantaged in society tries to dare the system. And by the system, I mean, you know, law enforcement. And it is not just, you know, with Mwenda, as the case was. As I mentioned earlier, every day in this country, there is people who wake up in the morning and what they experience in terms of policing is fear. Everything they do. In 2017, in the first year anniversary of the killings of Joseph, Willie, and Josephat, we went to the communities just to hear what the experience with policing is like here in Nairobi. And we found out that most community members experience police very differently from what we would normally expect. For example, the issue of extortion. It is very widespread in the communities, especially the slum communities, such that there are people who do business, and the first monies they make, they know this one is for the police officers who patrol this street, because at some point they will come for it. Issues of profiling. There are communities where if you dress well, you know, you're considered to be, you know, a thief because you're supposed to be poor. Where did you get this money from? And so when it goes to illegal detention, assault, you know, issues to do with enforced disappearances and even killings, those now become the grave versions of the small-time violations that community members face. And one thing, I know probably I might forget this, concerning the National Coroner Services Act. One of the issues that our officers have faced in the last in many years, you know, is the issue of psychosocial wellness of the officers. And with that in mind, we would want to delink the role of, you know, collecting, you know, bodies of persons who have passed away in the community from the police officers, so that we have experts and professionals in that area doing that job. That would be one step of ensuring that, you know, the psychosocial wellness of our officers is taken care of. And it's one of the reasons why we're also pushing for the National Coroner Services Act. to be implemented. Yeah.
All right. And I'm just pulling up that front page of the Standard.
Yes.
But perhaps, Hannah, you could tell us, was this sort of work? He was a human rights lawyer, Willie. Was it something he sort of fell into, or was it something he was passionate about?
I think he began working, that is at political release prisoners. I think passion began from there. Yeah, but we never thought that it would end his life. You know, he would give stories, and I used to ask him, "You're scared? What if you die?" Then he was like, "You only die once." So, but it's a job he used to enjoy, and he did it with a lot of passion. Actually, even back home, if someone was caught by police, they would just call him, and that person, he would even go to the police station, and that person will be released. So it was something he was passionate about. Yes, since his years in released political prisoners. Yeah.
Okay. And speaking as somebody who's lived through this, what sort of support do families who find themselves in this position require? Because Aggrey has talked about how for some people, the last time they saw their loved ones, they were arrested, they go to the police station, they're told, oh, they were released. As for where they are, we don't know. So what helps the most for you?
For people like me, what helps the most, like when Willie passed on, I then made sure we've gone for counseling for 3 years. And they also give us somebody, psychosocial support, someone who'd always call just to ensure we are doing well. And also our family members, they really supported us through up until now. Yeah. But most importantly, praying helped a lot. Yes.
All right.
And also having the children, you know, the children, they are a constant reminder of Willie Kimani. So yeah, like they offer you some source of comfort, even if he's not there, but they offer you some source of comfort. Yes.
You came from a situation where you had a partner.
Yes.
In life, you know, you could do your farming, but Willie was also bringing in a paycheck.
Yes.
Is financial support important for families in similar situations? Because now you have 2 children, you have a 4-year-old, you have a 9-month-old, right? So they're heavily dependent on you. They have to go to school, they have to eat. Did you receive assistance?
Yes, we did. And also, allow me to say this, as it's important for our men to also support their women, because no one knows when they are going to pass on. But also, IJM, they really supported us to pick up the pieces, and we moved on, and especially for the parents. Yes.
All right, so financial support is also critical, important.
Yes, very important.
All right, Eric, is that part of the reason why I saw reparations for these families as part of the demands made by the police reforms working group?
Yes, and
also psychosocial support in there as well.
Yes, and then of course you see the other thing is that to end this culture, then there ought to be an element of reparations, and I think we are looking at it very keenly from the part of the Law Society. It is something which we've asked a small team of lawyers to look into, and I don't want to say so much about it, but if the suspects have unlawfully caused the death of someone, you see the position in which they were in. They were police officers whose responsibility was actually to protect a life. And so the aspect of reparations come in to ensure that there is even greater accountability on the part of the police, so that a civil suit should be filed against the suspects to compel them to compensate the families for the loss that they have suffered during this period. And that in itself then will bring into fore the question of responsibility for the acts which they have undertaken. And I think there have been 1 or 2 or 3 cases where police officers have been sued in their personal capacity for causing either harm or for arresting people who they ought not to have arrested. So I think that should be an ongoing conversation to just ensure that where police abuse their authority, then they become aware that not only will they be subject to criminal prosecutions, but there is a probability that they are going to lose their property through an action for reparations.
Okay. All right. As the front page of the Standard loads, Aggrey, this was a police officer who was able to, who despite having been facing a complaint before IPOA, was still able to move around and orchestrate all these events. He was able to trump up charges, traffic offense charges. He was able to, what he registered, I think, 2 Airtel lines with which to speak to an informer who could tell him when Willie and the client were leaving court. The taxi driver was Mwiruri, correct?
Yes.
All right. And how was he still able to do all of this while he was still facing a complaint before IPOA?
That is because as a nation, we have not appreciated the gravity of impunity. And I think a few years ago, the DPP really tried to pursue the possibility of getting people in authority out of that authority whenever they're accused of crimes. But in this case, and I think as it still obtains as we speak, someone could even be, charged with an offense and given bail, and they would still be working as officers. And that becomes an issue because then the issues of witness tampering, become a reality. And I think in this case, and also just to appreciate also the Witness Protection Agency, because a lot of the key witnesses in the matter were taken into safety very early and kept in safety. And even with these officers in different prisons, at some point during the case, we had allegations of witness tampering, of a level of bribery and all that. And this was while they were in prison. And so the lesson that we need to learn as a country when it comes to that is that there are certain allegations that once made should allow the National Police Service to take administrative action to ensure that such perpetrators do not have access to power that can allow them to interfere with the life limb of some of these victims that have faced violations that they have perpetrated. And so right now I think when it comes to IPOA can open an investigation and even recommend charges to DPP, and then DPP makes the decision to charge, and an officer would still be in their position of influence. And that is an issue. It should not be that way. It should be in such a way that once there are certain allegations against you, we speedily ensure that they are verified or not, and then make a determination for you to go back to work, as the case may be.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, we need to take a break, but we continue the conversation on the other side. I've finally been able to trace that front page Standard headline, and it's death for the beast of Mavoko. Frederick Leliman was a police officer whose responsibility was to keep law and order. However, when he ran afoul of a border rider who couldn't stomach his bullying, all he knew was to kill. He not only killed the rider, but also anyone who stood in his way, and took beer and nyama choma to celebrate the heinous act. He got a date with the hangman on Friday. When you look at this man, Hannah, do you see a beast? Or do you feel sorry for him? Did you face him in court? Were you able to? After hearing what he did?
Yes. Actually, when you're in court, you almost feel like you want to ask him a question. You want to ask him why. But then again, you cannot. Actually, on Friday, I had thought of going with the children. Because for Castro, if you tell him, he'll understand. So I wanted to go with Castro to court and just tell him these are the people who killed your dad. But then again, I said I will not do that. I don't want it to have a negative impact in his life, because maybe he would think maybe the policemen are bad. Because sometimes he'll say, when I grow up, I want to become a policeman. But when I see that man, I don't think he looks like a beast. He's a normal human being. Maybe it is only that maybe that day he exercised his power wrongly, or he made a bad decision that day. And unfortunately, the law caught up with him, even if it's much, much later, 6 or 7 years, or maybe it was something he was used to. He was used to killing people, dumping their bodies, and maybe no evidence is found or no body is found. But maybe with the Willis case, he could not get away with. Maybe it was a stopper for him. Yeah.
All right. Okay, when we come back, Eric, you talked about this almost having been a perfect crime. We'll get the details on the other side of this break. All right, welcome back to AM Live, and we're looking at ending enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings this morning. Eric, this Frederick Leliman, who was in charge of the police post, Syokimau Police Post, exhibited premeditation. He registered with a lost ID. He registered 2 airtime lines, which he used to communicate with Ngugi, who later confessed to the crime. And I remember earlier asking, if it were not for the confession, would you have been able to put the dots together? And then even his choice, the fact that they were not logged into the OB book, again demonstrates premeditation. He recruited a friend to help. They were loaded up into a boot, went to the killing field as it was described by Justice Lesit. I also read that there was a 3-hour debate on what to do with the 3. So you say if it had rained, their bodies would have disappeared, right? Or got into a park and would not know today. Hannah would not have the closure she has today. Why do you say this was almost a perfect crime?
And you see, one is that the police have resources that ordinary people don't have. They are able to monitor because of their, the need for them to prevent crime. They're able to monitor your phone, your movements. They have, access to vehicles and everything, and that's how they were able to mount a surveillance on the 3. And you see, the surveillance on the 3 did not just begin on the day that they were supposed to be abducted. It began earlier. They had all the information about them. They had tried to get close to the family members so that they can be able to extract information on them. And so in this case, there were a series of breaks, which if they hadn't happened, they would have gotten away with it. Why? Because of the resources that they have. The first break was the fact that Willie Kimani, having dealt with cases of police brutality, and his employer having been following up on cases of police brutality, understood the danger of undertaking that work. Secondly, in the cell or in the container in which they were put in, Willie Kimani had a pen and had a tissue paper on which he wrote that they were in danger, and was lucky enough that there was a window facing the road, and they were able to throw out that piece of information, and it was picked by a boda person who was able then unrelentlessly to call and relay that information. So you see, that's another break, that it was picked up by someone who was conscious, and that person continued to make phone calls to that number to ensure that the information is relayed. So that is another lucky break that is in this case. And after that, immediately the information reached IJM. Because of understanding the sensitiveness of the work that they do, they immediately rolled into action. I remember that time the Law Society was also informed, the DPP and everyone else, and so there was a collective response to try and get accountability, find out where are these people, because they are in a police cell. So you can imagine that there is no booking at a police station. So there is no one to say that actually you are there, because the only way to determine whether you are in a police station or not is a booking. But the fact that now that boda person has already transmitted that information, in itself, it became a break. And as my colleague has said, that they were dumped in a place where they were almost sure that those bodies would never be recovered. Because again, it is extremely difficult to prove a crime of murder without the body. So you have that, and then because of there's so many coordination that had to be done, you have the phone, and so you are able to correlate all that, and eventually you have someone confessing, and when they confess, all this piece of information, different pieces of information that were coming together are then connected. And so that's why we say that in the absence of those very little breaks, this would have been a perfect crime.
Okay. And Aggrey, in undertaking this work, Hannah says she and Willie never imagined something like this. This is how things could possibly end up. In your line of work, the people you work with, how did this change your perception?
First of all, let me mention that we work with a team of very courageous, very relentless and passionate people when it comes to, it's basically supporting people who are living in poverty. And that is the common thread in every individual that we have sought to support. Every appearance we make in Parliament, with government agencies, in the communities, and even in international fora, is to speak for these people who cannot speak for themselves. And so for us, in that season, it was a very heavy season, probably not as heavy as what Anna and the family experienced, but it was really heavy for the team. But even then, we did not lose one person in the IJM fraternity. Every person who was working on the 23rd of June continued to work for most of the time after that. And even when some of the team members left, it was not so much to do with the 23rd of June. It was more to do with the, career progression and other reasons. And so within the team, a lot of us were really determined to see justice in this matter. And even team members from IJM who eventually went into other areas of work have continued to keep tabs on this case. And in the last 2-3 days, a lot of them have reached out, just sharing the relief that has come with the conviction and now the sentence.
Okay, so I just pulled up the IJM website, and I see here, we won't stop until police are protectors from violence and not perpetrators of it. And looking at the kind of work you're engaged in at IJM is traffic and slavery, violence against women and children, stories of rescue. About IJM, all right, but essentially you said you represent the voiceless.
Yes. You
speak for them.
Yes.
All right, and just a reminder of our topic of conversation, ending enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. This was the headline story on Saturday on the front page of the Standard. It's death for the beast of Mavoko. And this is the gentleman, the police officer, who was sentenced to death. His name is Frederick Leliman. Eric, was this a landmark verdict, in your view, verdict and sentence?
Yes, it was. It builds into the body of 2, 3, 4 other decisions, major decisions, with regards to police accountability for deaths that have occurred, some in prison cells and perpetrated by senior police officers. So it's a landmark decision. It is also landmark in the sense that it is one of those decisions really that cements the use of technology in investigation and prosecution of criminal cases. I mean, after that, there's been a lot of use of technology to detect and crimes that have occurred. So it is a big decision. But the biggest impact that this decision has is on police accountability. With regards to, I think, was it the third accused, the lady, the court noted that she was a junior police officer.
This was Sylvia.
Yes, Sylvia, a junior police officer. Her defense was, I was junior, these were my seniors, they were giving me instructions, and so the police force is a chain of command force, and so therefore when my seniors then give me directions, then I'm expected to comply with those directions. But the court was extremely clear that you take then personal responsibility the moment you obey commands that are against the law. So it was a very, big statement, because often police rely on the chain of command to perpetrate the kind of crimes that they do. When you look at the chain of stories that are there about extrajudicial killings, you find that it becomes extremely difficult for the police to investigate when their investigations are pointing that their fingers to the senior members of the police force. And that's why one of the things that we really need is for Kenya to ratify the International Convention Against Enforced Disappearances, because it has very clear provisions about the question of command responsibility, and the fact that those who are in authority can then be held liable, in police command, can be held liable for either their own acts or commission or failing to take action to prevent police brutality. It is only when you have that environment that then we can be able to say that you and me are safe in this country. Because what happened to Willy Kimani and Muiruri can happen to anyone. It can happen to anyone, and that, I think, should be the message that needs to resonate with members of parliament, with the Attorney General, with the President of this country, that there is a need to ensure proper accountability within the police, because the police have been given a lot of powers by law to be able to detect crime. They have the technical expertise, they have the budgetary resources to be able to do that. And so when they are the perpetrators themselves, it becomes extremely difficult to get accountability. And so therefore there is a need to have a structure, a legal structure that ensures that there is accountability, because the absence of it means, and this is what we have seen, that all of us as Kenyans are not safe from police brutality, from enforced disappearances.
Okay. Where are we in this process, Aggrey?
We are not far. There's a lot that needs to be done. If you look at the requests or demands that the Police Reform Working Group made, you'll notice there's still a lot to be done. For example, when it comes to enforced disappearances, today, if the police arrest me and they do not account for where I have been taken, which happens a lot, and my whereabouts become unknown for the rest of time, where do we start? Even if we know the officers who took me, maybe it's Officer Theuri, for example, who works Central Police Station. If I'm disappeared, where will my family start, for example? There is no regime that allows us to prosecute that officer, even for murder, in the absence of fact of death and cause of death. Because if you say I died, when did I die? Who killed me? What killed me, you know? And so when we ask for legislation on enforced disappearances, if someone disappears another, if the police disappear you, it becomes very easy to hold them accountable under that law, even if the whereabouts of the victim are not known. So that if they end up saying, unfortunately for Juma, this happened and he died, we feared this might happen, and so we buried him somewhere in Loitoktok, which is a common dumping ground, then that becomes a mitigating factor. So instead of us giving you a sentence that is severe, we consider that you told us the whereabouts of the deceased. That would help the family to move on, and so it helps, we reduce your sentence in terms of the criminal justice system in that regard. As we speak, there is no legislation to that effect. Had Willie, Joseph, and Josephat not been found, we would never have had a basis to take these officers to court. And even if we did, as some lawyers have argued, we would not have, had a very strong case that would stand the kind of judicial scrutiny that Justice Lesit exhibited in this case, because we would not know whether they died or not, what killed them, and what killed them is connected to the cause or the person who killed them. And so we really need to have legislation on enforced disappearances. I had mentioned about the Coroner Services, National Coroner Services Act. That one goes without saying. Because today, if police in Central are involved in a killing within its jurisdiction, police in Central are responsible for taking this body to the morgue. If a colleague of yours is the one who participated in this, you can take this body to the morgue and register it whichever way you'd like. Most of the time, a lot of these bodies are registered as mob injustice or mob justice. You know, some killings, someone was shot even mistakenly, but they're registered as an armed thug, that kind of thing. So the level of accountability required in that space is such that the National Coroner Services Act needs to be implemented. When it comes to the issue of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into extrajudicial executions and enforced disappearances, we do not know the extent of the killings and the disappearances that have been caused by law enforcement in this country. We do not know. Yet we have families, we have parents, mothers, spouses, children who have this information. We cannot move forward effectively if we do not appreciate and understand our past. So the reason for that is for us to get the data in a collated format that can inform how we are going to reform the police. This is a demand that the Police Reform Working Group has had for many, many years, but it does not have goodwill in government for it to happen, because that is something that cannot be done by anybody less than the President of the Republic of Kenya. The Missing Voices Coalition in the last few years has been trying to collect information on killings, and the numbers are still shocking. They're not even the complete numbers, but still we have hundreds of people being killed every year, courtesy of the police. We still have tens of people whose whereabouts are unknown, having been arrested by known police officers. Nothing can be done as far as that is concerned. And so we still have a lot to do in that space. But also, we're not asking for accountability in a vacuum. We know that the conditions of service of our police officers are wanting, for lack of a better word. If you look at government, and everybody in government who's called an officer, and then you relate that information to the amount of money that they are paid in terms of salaries, the police are at the bottom. So we cannot be underpaying our police officers and at the same time demanding so much from them. Truly, a lot of them work in situations that are hostile. Issues to do with shift. We have officers who work 24 hours straight. If you meet them at the 23rd hour, this is somebody who's really not happy to see you, regardless of your challenge. So we need to be in a situation where their terms of service are such that we appreciate what they do. So that if we are identifying how they work in terms of shift, it becomes something that is very clear. You work 8 hours, the shift changes, someone else takes up. Issues of overtime. Almost 100% of police officers work overtime. That is not considered when it comes to their remuneration. Issues of transfer, deployment, even the consistency in discipline for officers is really wanting. I know there's some work in coming up with sentences when it comes to offenses against discipline within the police. But as it is right now, discipline is an arbitrary act of discretion. If you do something in one police station, you will be transferred to Lodwar. If you do it in another, you will be promoted. Others are fired, others are demoted over the same issue. So there's no consistency when it comes to sentences of discipline within the service. And so this brings a lot of frustration amongst police officers, which then, carries itself into how they interact with the public in general and affects our policing as a nation.
All right. And thank you so very much for that, because something Eric said stuck with me, and that is it can happen to anyone.
Yes.
But Hannah, I'll let you have the last word. How would you like us to remember Willie?
How would I like you to remember Willie? As a person who was very passionate about his work, he was also very hardworking, and most of all, he was a go-getter. When he set his mind on this, he will surely achieve it, no matter how long it takes. And I think Agri can agree with me. That's who he was. And he was a very happy person, very cheeky, and most of all, he loved his family very, very much.
Cheeky?
Yes.
So he would play pranks on people, or?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'll end the conversation there. Thank you very much, Eric Theuri. He's the Law Society of Kenya president. We've also been joined by Willie Kimani's widow, Hannah Kimani, and Agre Juma from the International Justice Mission Kenya chapter. And I will close this because I'd like to leave us with a good memory, and that is one of Willie Kimani. May he rest in peace now that justice has been done. Have yourself a good morning.